Good afternoon. My name is Tim Lynch. I am your host of Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. And I have to tell you, this is the first episodes that I can say it's the award-winning Legal Lines. BNN TV was very kind and offered and gave me their Spotlight 2013 award for our program. So I appreciate all the folks here at BNN who made that possible. It's my pleasure to bring this program to you. And this program takes place, this particular program takes place in the backdrop of the 10-year anniversary of the Goodrich decision, bringing marriage here to Massachusetts. And across the country, Hawaii is supposed to be the 15th state, and Illinois will soon follow to be the 16th state. And in the course of all these debates on marriage, one of the issues that continually gets brought up are children. And indeed, in the recent Supreme Court case, Justice Kennedy pointed out, what about the 40,000 children of same-sex couples in California? Do they not have rights? Indeed, there are a couple of 100,000 children being raised in same-sex households throughout the country. What about their rights? Also, there's 147,000 children in foster care who are ready for adoption and not being adopted. The New York Times quoted many studies last year showing that same-sex married couples, now in the tens of thousands, have been adopting these children. Children who before were not adopted are now being adopted. They are adopting children who are older. They are adopting children in what's called an open adoption. That is to say, the biological parent still retains some of the rights, visitation rights for the child. So instead of condemning these people should be honored. They're taking children, giving them a stable, loving home, and taking them out of a foster care system where they are moved from home to home to home. And if you look at the U.S. Department of Justice website, you'll see that they keep statistics on these things, and there is consistently a high correlation between children brought up in foster care and people in prison for violent crimes. And that brings us to a final group of children. What about the LGBT youth? They are children brought up in this country subject to bullying. They're brought up in a country where in 34 states they are treated as second-class citizens. With me today is my good friend, Erika Richards. I ask that you join us with any questions you might have. Our phone number here is 617-708-3290. Erika is the chairperson of a joint task force on LGBT youth in the court system, a task force I was honored to serve on. Erika, how are you?
I'm doing well. Congratulations on your award, Tim. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm honored to be on the award-winning Legal Lines.
Well, it's great to have you. You've done so much work in the community, and this is just one more task force you've been on. And I honestly, I don't know where we would be without people like you in our community. I think it's awesome. But specifically this task force, what is the problem that this task force, you obviously were instrumental in creating it, and I guess the question is why?
So we created the task force to address really two key issues. The first is the overrepresentation of LGBTQ youth in the court system, whether that's in child welfare or the kind of abuse and neglect foster care type proceedings that you were talking about earlier, or the juvenile justice system, so criminal offenses that youth are charged with. It's really quite striking to see the disproportionate representation of LGBTQ youth in both of those systems. Looking at the national statistics, as far as adolescents, about 5 to 7% of young people in this country identify as LGBTQ. But when you compare that to the folks that are in the juvenile justice system, that number jumps to about 15% of young people in the juvenile justice system identify as LGBTQ. And the number gets even more striking when you look at young people who are out of their homes, either homeless or in the child welfare system in some way. That number jumps to anywhere from 20 to 40% of young people who are homeless and out of home identify as LGBTQ.
Yeah, I think most of the statistics say 34.5%.
That's Massachusetts specifically, yes, it's 34.5%.
which is shocking. But that's the percentage, but the numbers, as I understand it, the Massachusetts Department of Ed has 6,000 children, homeless children, enrolled in high school. They don't keep numbers on children who are not enrolled in school, obviously, for obvious reasons, but that number has to be at least a multiple of that. So you're talking high school kids in Massachusetts, somewhere in the order of 20,000. And if we're talking about 34.5% or somewhere of that neighborhood, you're talking about somewhere in the order of 7,000 homeless youth, homeless LGBT youth of high school age. And if you ever worked, I've noticed them in Boston. I mean, anybody who's worked downtown Boston, you walk down the streets and you see them. And it's striking because you're used to seeing older people who are homeless, which is sad in and of itself, but now you're seeing younger people, and they tend to be LGBT youth.
Absolutely. I think you had folks from Youth on Fire here in the past. They do great work. They're an LGBTQ-friendly drop-in center for young people, and some of the information that they have about the numbers of LGBTQ youth who come through their doors is really quite striking. And you see the effects of family rejection and discrimination on LGBTQ youth in particular are really creating this kind of compounding problem of young people who identify as LGBTQ youth who are involved in foster care and homeless and or in the juvenile justice system. So that's one of the things that we're really interested in combating as part of the task force.
So, and I think it's important also to mention that these children do not typically fall in the usual safety nets. Like they don't, we've had people from GLAD on, and they discuss the problems they face in homeless shelters. The homeless shelters are usually run by religious institutions openly hostile to people who are LGBT youth or perceived to be, and so they don't go there. And then you have the foster care system, which you're mentioning, and the problem there, as I understand, is people don't screen these children. They don't have any protocols in which to screen them. They put them in a foster home, and they face the same discrimination they faced in the original home, and so they leave the system. They run away again. And so they get into the criminal court system because they go into survivor crimes. They steal food, or they might end up in prostitution. So then sadly, this wave of children are hitting the system, and it's surprised the court.
Absolutely. And there's actually even one more additional factor is school discipline policies. So we see this trend of harsher sanctions or disciplinary action in schools that kind of lead to police involvement in schools, which ultimately lead to young people being in the juvenile justice or criminal justice systems. And what was really surprising to me to learn was LGBTQ young people are 3 times more likely to have some sort of sanction for the exact same behavior as their straight, non-transgender peers. So it's not only are there not the safety nets, but there's actually some even more discriminatory or biased treatment that is leading kids into the courthouse doors.
Yeah, 3 times more. That's certainly verifiable. That this is discriminatory.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So in face of all this, and you've actually had judges come to the commission as well. Could you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, sure. So the task force really came together to talk both about this overrepresentation of young people and also the experiences that they're having. So we have judges from both the juvenile court and the probate and family court. We also have prosecutors and public defenders, a court-appointed special advocate, private attorneys who are representing LGBT youth in court to come together and talk about what's actually happening when young people come in the door. And just, if you can imagine how overwhelming it is for a young person to come to court in the first place. There's judges and attorneys and court staff. It's a very overwhelming experience. And then when you add to that, standing up in front of the courthouse, in front of the judge, and having the judge call you by the wrong gender, or having your attorney question your sexuality the same way that your parents did when they kicked you out. These are really challenging experiences that judges and attorneys are coming together to share and to really try to combat together.
Yeah, and that was the nice thing about this joint task force is you had people from a whole spectrum of every point of entry. which these children come in contact with the system, as it were. But what was striking also for me was there were no protocols in place at any one of these.
Right.
They had no training, education, much less experience in dealing with LGBT youth, what their issues were, which I find striking. You see me stumbling there because they certainly received training on all different types of cultures and things like that, of all the different people that walk through the system, and yet no LGBT youth training or protocols.
Well, I should say that the state agencies under the Patrick administration really have beefed up their efforts to improve the quality of experience of LGBTQ youth. So the Department of Children and Families, which does foster care, and the Department of Youth Services, which does more of the juvenile justice work, they do have cultural competency trainings and working groups, and they're drafting model policies. But the group that we're working with on this task force is attorneys, probation, court clinicians, and there really is nothing there to work with. So that's really what we're trying to do together. I think the task force is focused on 3 different areas. We're focused on training that's really high quality LGBTQ cultural competency training that's targeted at court actors. And then we're also working on expanding resources and access to resources, and then also this kind of written policies and procedures that we really don't have to date.
Which is again amazing. And what's sad is that if this is the way it is in Massachusetts, you shudder to think what's happening in the rest of the country.
Right.
So the first thing you mentioned was the training of court actors. Now the court actors would be whom?
Everyone that interacts with a young person in court. So that's everyone from probation officers to judges to attorneys to court clinicians. So we recently just had a joint training that the task force put on with the Boston Alliance of LGBT Youth, Bagley. So we had young youth presenters and attorney presenters at the Juvenile Bar Association. So talking to attorneys who are working with youth to talk about how to adequately represent LGBTQ youth in particular. We have a training coming up for court clinicians to talk about how to sensitively ask the questions that you need to ask to understand whether a young person's sexual orientation or gender identity is a part of their case, a part of their interactions with the court system.
Why is it a part of their case? I mean, I think that's important. People are listening to this like, well, why don't they treat them like any other kid coming through the system? Why is it important that an attorney representing these kids or one of the probation department or somebody else, why is it so important that they understand that this is an LGBTQ youth?
I think for a few different reasons. One is that the experiences that they had that led them to come into court in the first place really might be closely tied to family or school or outside experiences based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. Another is without knowing, people make a lot of assumptions, and the assumptions that an individual person makes, it's as simple as saying, do you have a boyfriend, to a girl who is a lesbian, and all of a sudden the trust and the openness between the attorney or advocate and their client just shuts down because of this assumption that comes out. There's more severe experiences of harassment or discomfort or even victimization of young people because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, whether it's by court staff or by residential staff, that people need to be aware of when they're advocating. One additional reason is you actually see more LGBTQ youth are more likely to be detained while a case is pending because of a fear that they're not safe at home. So kind of being aware of not only how a youth identifies, but also what their relationship is